This is a funny story. Just I was telling some of the monks yesterday evening, it happened once that there was a lady who came in the evening to Bodhinyana Monastery. This was several years ago, and unfortunately and I could see from her wrist, she still had that tag they put on the wrist. She was in Bentley Hospital with no psychiatric problems. And so I recognized her, and I said, well, you really do need to go back to hospital. She said, no, you told me to come here on the psychic plane. So I realized there's a problem here. And so she didn't want to leave. So one thing which I did know, there was some people who worked for they called it the PET team at the time, psychiatric emergency team. So we called them. The trouble is, we live down in Serpentine, it's a long way away. So by the time they came, it took a while to settle her down. But then, when they arrived at the gate, they asked me how she'd been behaving. And at one time she threw a cup of tea at me. I didn't mind the cup breaking, but what a waste of tea. But nevertheless, I told them that. I said, if we have anybody who's got psychiatric problems and is also violent, we have to call the police. So the only police station which was there at the time was over in Armadale. So we called them up, I said, they will come. And this is our local police station in Armadale. And they didn't know the way to Bodhinyana Monastery. They went by Serpentine Dam, which is twice as long as it should be. And so we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. But then when the police actually did come, the psychiatrists, they know the stuff about the mind, but sometimes they lose what we call their common sense, because they left their headlights on all the time. And so their car had no electricity in the batteries anymore. And so when with the police, they asked this lady to go back into hospital, they could not take her. They didn't have any power in their car. And the rules for the police couldn't take them, it was against their rules. So they were stuck. But fortunately we talked the police into taking her into the hospital. But sometimes that's what happens when you leave your car lights on. all sorts of problems happen afterwards. But when anything like this happens, anything which is troublesome, it just, to me, I always say, it gives me a nice story to talk about later on. Like even today, just on the way in here, we went past, on the way back from doing a blessing at an office. Interesting blessing, I don't mind saying this, because it was one of the old buildings on Murray Street, and they had a ghost in there. So they wanted me to go and bless the buildings. Sometimes I say ghost busting, but that's a bit unkind to the poor ghosts. I'm not a violent monk. I will not bust a ghost. Instead of busting a ghost, just being kind to it. Sitting down, and as far as I was concerned, there was a ghost there. And so to be able to give it such kindness, to relax it, to make it very peaceful, and give it a lot of what we call merits. Because I'm a monk, a senior monk, I do a lot of meritorious actions, so I shared my merits with the ghost. With the hope that the ghost would receive those merits. And what actually happens is the mind gets just so joyful, so happy, that someone is not afraid of it, not trying to get rid of it, but just giving it a boost of kindness. And if ever you receive that boost of kindness, your mind gets joyful. And it's from that the mind gets the ghost gets reborn into a much better realm. It doesn't really belong in the ghost realm. The ghost realm is for minds which are just quite lost, lonely, depressed, not so much energy. But anyway, So I did that little job. And then after that, just coming back, we went past, just round the Catholic cathedral, there was Mercedes girls' school. Is it still girls' school or is it co-ed now? It's still girls. Because I will never forget that school. I did give a talk there once. And it's just what's fascinating being a monk. You go to all sorts of places to give talks. So I went into to give a talk, and the next day I was walking down St. George's Terrace. I forget exactly what I was doing, what business I was attending to, but then a couple of the girls came past me. And they said, "Oh, you're the monk who gave a talk at our school yesterday." And I said to them, "Wow, I'm surprised you remembered me." And they replied by saying, "We'll never forget you." Oh, that's so kind. And then they said, "We'll never forget you. How can you ever forget a monk called Ajahn Brahm?" It's teenage girls trying to tease you. And instead of getting upset, I said, "Oh, thank you." And I've repeated that story so many times. I'm glad that they gave me that extra material for my Friday night talks. And so that's one of the things with life. When life happens, you learn how to never get offended or surprised by it, but take it on board and enjoy it. And understand what these things mean when somebody dies and they become a ghost. And actually how the joy can take them out of that sense of negativity. Even to the point, I know that sometimes people say I go too far with some of these statements, but I don't mind because this is what I know. That when, say, a person gets depressed, how do you get a person out of the depressed state? Even this is, this life, this birth, you're still a human being. How can you get them out of that depressed state? And, if they're very, very, very depressed or something and they can hurt themselves, okay, some drugs. But even better than that is give them joy, happiness. Crack a joke if you can. And that's one of the problems I was saying to the monks, that I tell jokes to the monks and they always laugh, because I'm their boss. And if they don't laugh, they get into big trouble. They're not big trouble. But anyway, I always like to see the funny side of life. And if you can show a person who's depressed the funny side of life, and they start to smile, and they start to have joy, and they start to laugh, that actually cracks them out of depression. It may be only just momentarily, but they see another way of looking at life. You're not changing the circumstances in which they live, you're just changing the way they react to life. And that's a whole different ball game. I know people think, I'm really depressed, I'm in trouble, my goodness, that the rents are going up, I can't afford it, I have to work so hard, what am I going to do? If any of you are in trouble with your rent, and you find it's very difficult to make ends meet in Perth these days, the solution is really easy. Become a monk or a nun. Please excuse me. I made you laugh a little bit. Have you ever noticed you cannot laugh and have fear at the same time? For some reason it just takes away the negativity in your mind, so you just basically can't be afraid of things. That's one of the reasons, if it was allowed and I cracked a joke and no one laughed, I'd try and tickle you, just to get you out of just the negativity. Unfortunately, people will say that's abuse. I can't touch anything these days. So what you do is, you learn. That's what I've done. I wonder, why am I teaching? Why do many people want to talk to you? why do many people ask these questions? You know, you can get all the answers to many of these questions online, in books, from other places. But sometimes it's just who's actually giving those answers. It's more than just the information. It's the kindness which comes with that information. And that is my job, to be able to share that kindness with each one of you. A little smile. But then what happens, that you're not here all the time. So if you're really depressed or getting fed up with the world and starting wondering where this world is going, the most important thing to do is for you to go into your bathroom, where you'll find a mirror, and look at your face in that mirror. Smile. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but that's one of the most amazing little tips which I was given by my first meditation teacher, who was a Thai lay person. He just told me I'm not smiling enough. It was true. And so he basically gave me these exercises to do every morning. I know sometimes the monks say I should do some more exercise. I do exercise. Every morning I do 10 push-ups. That's quite a lot for a 71-year-old. 10 push-ups. How many push-ups do you do in the morning? But my 10 push-ups are very easy, suitable for my age. I look at myself in the mirror, my 2 fingers. 1, 2, 3. I make a silly face at myself. And I always end up laughing. Now imagine being able to do that every morning. To look at yourself in the mirror and laugh at yourself. That had a huge effect on giving me energy. The first time I started this, I was just a student at university. Sometimes at those days, I must admit I wasn't keeping 5 precepts when I started university. I certainly was at the end of the university. Sometimes in the morning you felt, ugh. You had a headache, hangover, you've been late at night, you're studying or talking to your friends late at night, you weren't sleeping properly. But nevertheless, you could always manage a little smile. And that little smile changed my life. Sometimes I tell this to young people. Young people are looking for a nice partner in life. What makes you most attractive? Your smile. Do you want to spend your life married to a miserable guy? Or a miserable woman? The smile is actually the simplest makeup you can possibly put on. And I don't know why this is, but wherever I tend to go, and this is true, the other monks will agree with this, wherever I go, people like taking photographs with me, or photographs of me. I think, what on earth are you doing? I'm an old guy, old and fat. Why do you want to take a photograph of me? You can imagine these 2 monks, like Wazzy, he's nice and young, and Pasado, he's kind of middle-aged. Is that right? Yeah. And me? Well, I get so many photographs. It got to the point that in Indonesia, any Indonesians here? Oh, there you go, yes. Indonesia are crazy about taking photographs. All these stories. This was, oh no, that was in Hong Kong, this story. In Indonesia, this was at the airport. In Singapore, I was going from one terminal to a flight to another flight, connecting flight. And all these Indonesians, they just come back from going on pilgrimage in India. And they recognized me. Ajahn Brahm. I said, yeah? Oh, it's so lucky to meet you. Can we take a photograph of you? Of course I don't mind, but there was about 60 or 70 of them. And they had to have the group photograph, individual photographs, photographs with their close family. It was taking forever. And that's the only time when I had a connecting flight. And when I got to the gate, they were calling out my name. Mr. Brahma Wangso, your flight is about to leave, come quickly. I almost missed my flight because of that. So I tried to stop the problem. And the reason I tried to stop the problem, the way I started to stop the problem, I was telling people that when I went to that big monument in central Java, Borobudur, there were signs there saying, please don't take photographs of the great monument, Borobudur. And I said, well, ask why? Actually, the flashes of the cameras was degrading the stone, was destroying the monument. It was proved scientifically. And I said, well, look at me. I'm degrading fast. So they thought that was very funny, so they took more photographs. But that's one of the nice things about life. Instead of getting upset or angry or irritated, upset, you can actually join in the fun, which means you don't degrade, which means the joy, doesn't allow you to get depressed or afraid. That's one of the wonderful things about learning how to overcome fear and anxiety. I was just asking Prem, because I'm going to go to Colombo soon. I think that's next month, isn't it? Yeah, next month. And I had to cancel an important engagement here in Perth. That was in the Buddhist Council of Western Australia, done an amazing thing, managing to get a reception in Parliament House here in Perth, celebrating Wesak. But unfortunately I'll be in Colombo at the time, can't attend. And I got a good reason, because one of those events over there, that was in this big place, the Bandaranaike Memorial International Convention Hall, BMICH. And I just asked Prem, how many people going? How many did you say? 10,000. A gig, just done by me, 10,000. Even the Rolling Stones or Justin Bieber, I don't know, who's the really top person now? They'll have a hard time getting 10,000 at a gig. But anyhow, so what am I doing that for? The first time when I had to perform like that, giving a big talk, this was over in Singapore, that was one of the times I got a bit concerned. There's about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people coming for a talk, and just me giving the talk. And there's two things I started to be concerned about. Number one, what if I give a terrible talk? What if I give such a bad talk that no one wants to be a Buddhist ever again? And I thought that, for me, I respect Buddhism so much. That's a personal thing, but I respect it enormously. And so I think I feel so guilty if I don't actually give my very best and so inspire people, help people. This was in Singapore, and people don't have much time in Singapore. And about 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 people came that evening. They gave up, probably just had to rush a lunch, or rather rush a dinner, and just give up everything else just to come and listen to this what they call an Ang Mo monk, the white monk. So anyhow, I was concerned if I failed. But then I was also concerned if I succeeded. In those big audiences, it's so easy to get proud and arrogant. And if you get proud and arrogant, that's probably even worse than failing. I become just ahead of myself. So that's one of the reasons these days I try my very best to sometimes go incognito. So I remember this is what happens when you go incognito. I remember being in Vietnam at a conference, and I just sitting in the back. And when I was sitting in the back in Vietnam at a Buddhist conference, this Vietnamese monk came and sat next to me. I knew from experience what he wanted was just to practice his English. Because if those Vietnamese monks, Asian monks, if they know good English, they have many opportunities open to them. So this monk came and sat next to me and he said, "Now, who are you? Where are you from?" I said, "I am from Australia." "Oh, welcome to Vietnam." And he said, "What part of Australia?" I said, "I'm from Perth." "Oh." I'm not making this up, okay. And the next thing he said, "Do you know a famous monk called Ajahn Brahm?" He said that, honestly. Oh my goodness. And then I said, "Yes, I know him." And then I shouldn't have done this. I said, "I am Ajahn Brahm." Ah! He was kind of shocked. Oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? But instead of getting proud or arrogant or getting afraid, and I tell this to the monks, whenever you give talks, Vinupasada and Wasago and any of the nuns, you're not giving the talk. I went up on that stage and I said, the only reason why I'm opening my mouth and saying these things, because of all of the teachings which I had from my teacher, my master, Ajahn Chah, and all the other great monks which I knew, and all the things which I had read and learned from other highly attained monks and nuns. And I thought, I'm not giving the talk this evening. My teachers are. So you made a mistake there when you said Ajahn Brahm's giving. I almost said it there, didn't I? When Ajahn Brahm's giving the talk this evening, I never give a talk at the BSWA. It's all my teachers and all the people who have helped me. What that does, it takes away any sense of ego, any sense of fear, any sense of personally owning the contents of your talk. Sometimes I do say mistakes, and if I say mistakes, it's not my fault. It's my teacher, Ajahn Chah. Blame him. So that means you can have much more relaxation when you give a talk. So you should know by now, when I give a talk, I don't plan. You relax to the max, and let all these wonderful things come out. One of the things which I always do, you can see that I look at you when I give talks. When I look at you, actually you're helping me give those talks. Trying to tune into you. What do you really want on a Friday evening coming here? Inspiration is one of those things. Not information, but inspiration. Now, how can you live life? What's one of the biggest problems these days? The tiredness which we have. Because last week, for those of you who were here on Sunday, we held this big New Year's ceremony. And that New Year's ceremony, that really sort of exhausted me. Really tired me out. You know what people do to me on the New Year's ceremony? They sit me down and they put a bowl of water and I put my hands in front and they pour perfumed water over my hands. What do they do that for? It's crazy. And afterwards, when I go back to the monastery, oh, my hands really stink. They do that as an idea of like purity and just respect. And when you understand why they do these things, you can actually see it, and you sort of allow that, you celebrate people's motivations. I celebrate your kindness for coming here today and looking after one another and having a place where everybody feels welcome. I know that sometimes that people say, Ajahn Brahm, you should tell people to listen and sit up and don't point your legs at things. But no, if I'm giving the talk, you can point your legs at me, I give you permission, you can fall asleep during the talk. The only reason I say that is because I want everyone here to feel welcome. If you're teaching about Buddhism and kindness, and if I can't show that kindness to each one of you, then there's something wrong. Sometimes people want everybody who comes in here to be properly dressed, whatever that means. But I always tell them about one of the greatest nuns that ever was. Her name was Patachara, and her story was that she'd run away with her lover. She came from a very good family. Her lover, I think, was just low-born, but they loved each other, were both very good, and eventually she had a child, and they thought if they go back to their parents' house, when they just let themselves, or let her give birth in her parents' house, that would actually make the parents a bit more amenable to her husband. But she gave birth on the way, so they went straight back to their village. And so they tried that a second time. And again, she gave a few days premature birth, and that was in the forest. And after the new baby was born, her husband, who just really looked after her, loved her to bits, went looking for some wood to keep her warm, and took a piece of wood, but it was a snake, and the snake bit him, and he died. So she'd just given birth to her second child, and now she lost her husband, snake bite. So she decided she had to go back to see her parents. Now her husband had died, she had 2 kids, but then she had to cross a big stream, which was in flood, and she had like a 2 or 3-year-old kid and a new baby. What should she do? So she put the baby, told the new kid, told her 2 or 3-year-old son, you wait on this bank and I'll wade across the stream with the new baby, and then I'll put the baby down on the other side and come for you. And if you see me waving or something, then just come straight away. So she got across the stream with her new kid, put the kid down, sort of in a safe place on the dry bank, and then waded back again to get her elder son. But as she was midstream, she saw a big eagle come and swoop on her little baby. And of course she was frantic. She waved her hands around trying to scare the bird away. But instead, the bird wasn't scared. She was in the middle of the stream. So the bird took away her baby, and her 2-year-old kid thought Mummy was calling him and waded into the river and got swept away. So now she'd lost 2 kids. And if that wasn't bad enough, when she was trying to make her way back to her village, that she heard from somebody there'd been a big storm in that village the night before, and her 2 parents had been killed in the storm. She'd lost her 2 children, parent, and her husband on the same day. Now you can imagine what grief does to you. She went mad, crazy. She didn't know what to do, where to go. But eventually she wandered into the temple totally naked and screaming her head off. And when she walked into the temple, the Buddha was giving a sermon. And so people there at the edge of the crowd, the congregation, the audience, said, "You can't come in here, you're badly dressed, you're crazy." But the Buddha said, "No, let her in." She was a young woman, just given birth to a couple of children, maybe in her 20s. And the Buddha, out of kindness, said, "Let her in." And one of the monks got his robe and put it around her, so she was a little bit more decent. And that was the start of Patacharya's entry into being a nun. And one of the reasons I tell that story, it was a great tragedy, great grief. But then that nun became one of the most famous teachers in the whole of the nuns community. Because this is just not what other people tell me. Because I remember just reading all these stories of great nuns in the time of the Buddha. And I think many of you may be able to relate to this. Sometimes you've been meditating and meditating and meditating and practicing, going on retreats, but sometimes you're getting nowhere. You feel, my meditation, Ajahn Brahm talks about these nimittas and jhanas and stuff like that. I've got nowhere near that. Why not? And this was, some of the nuns were like that. And then they said, in their little record of their enlightenment, that this great nun came and taught them how to meditate. And they were just enlightened within a few days. And that nun's name was Patacharya. That was her. Amazing teacher. You know why she was an amazing teacher? One of the reasons was because she'd gone through so much suffering. It's a story I've said many times, but I used to say this a lot years ago. The story of the truckload of dung, the truckload of poo. Like, you come here, when you go back home, you find that someone has delivered a whole 10 cubic meters of cow poo and delivered it right in front of your front door. You can hardly get into your house. You have to go around the back somewhere through a window. And there's two things about that delivery of cow dung. Number one, you never ordered it. Number two, no one saw it coming, so you can't ring up someone to take it away. You're stuck with it. That's like some of the tragedies you experience in life. You can't say, why me? It's there. What can you do with it? What we do with cow dung or sheep dung or whatever else dung it is, camel dung, whatever it is, there's only one thing you can do. You get out the wheelbarrow and spade, you shovel it into the wheelbarrow, doesn't matter how many trips you have to make, and you take it round the back of your house where your garden is, and you dig it in. Maybe just one wheelbarrow a day. It maybe takes you 2 or 3 or 4 years. But in the end, the dung pile in front of your door is gone. And instead, in your garden, you have the most beautiful flowers of anyone in the whole street. And just the fragrance of those flowers just goes to the whole street, smells them. And also you come to Buddhist society and you offer those flowers to the monks and the nuns. And not just flowers, all the fruit you grow, because that is your cow dung. It's more fertilizer than any other street has got. Which means your fruit is the most delicious. That's not an exaggeration, because I'm not sure, I told this to many people on the retreat I gave at Jhana Grove recently. This cave where I spent about 6 months when I was a young monk, it had so many bats in it, and to this day I love the smell of bat poo. Because it reminds me, it's association with these wonderful meditations I had in this cave where there's so many bats. Number 2, at the front of that cave, just as you come out of the cave, there was a papaya tree. And the papayas on that tree were the most delicious papayas I'd ever eaten, or ever eaten since. And the reason was because each one of those papayas I ate, they were fertilized by thousands of bats. So I knew what I was eating. It wasn't papaya, it was bat poo. Transformed into the most delicious, sweet, juicy papaya I've ever had in my whole life. And that was where these similes came from. To realize that when you do have these terrible things happen in your life, lots of any type of poo, what people think is disgusting and they don't want, you take it and dig it in. And after time, you have the most delicious fruit and vegetables and flowers in your garden that anyone has in Perth. You understand where it all came from? Where does wisdom come from? Where does compassion come from? From the dog poo of your life. That's one of the reasons you start to look at the terrible things which happen to you, the disgusting traumas which you experience. Why me? You can't answer that question, why me? But the question is, what are you doing about it? You can always dig it in. If you can dig in the dog poo of life, or whatever poo it is, then you can have this incredible people come into being, the Patacharas of life, the Ajahn Chahs of life. I don't know what... one of the things which Ajahn Chah told me, one of the most important reasons why he eventually became a monk, I should you 2 stories. First of all, when he was a kid, a small child growing up in a village in the northeast of Thailand. Like most kids, they don't have internet, or in those days anyway, so they used to play games with other people, other kids in the village. And one of the games they used to like to play was like kids play house. They used to play monk. And he would always volunteer when he was a young kid to play the monk. You get an old piece of rag or something, wrap it around him, sit on a rock and pretend to be the monk. And he loved that because all his friends would go to their mummies and get some food for him to eat. He said that's where he fell in love with being a monk. Free food and cakes and stuff. But then more than that, he said that he did have a girlfriend in the village, and they loved each other. They wanted to marry and live together. But then what happened was they decided, or the mother of one of them said, no, this is not a good match, and they chose a better partner for this girl. So Ajahn Chah was broken-hearted. I don't know if I told you that story before. I remember him telling me that. And so that was one of the reasons why he decided to become a monk, because life sometimes just doesn't go the way you expect it to. And even though he didn't have much education, still became a very, very wise and smart monk. It's one of the reasons why I stayed for such a long time. For those of you who know my history, he was a theoretical physicist I was at Cambridge University. So I used to know Nobel laureates, but none of them was as smart, as wise as this Ajahn Chah had only done 4 years at school. That really shocked me. What were they teaching me in schools and universities in UK? When this fellow, 4 years, he knew so much more about life. That emotional intelligence, that way of just learning whatever happens to you in life, whatever happens to you in life, you can dig in. You've made this beautiful garden of wisdom and kindness. And the wisdom of kindness is much more valuable, I thought, than learning how to make a new quantum computer or learning how to smash atoms together. This was actually just something which I really loved to see, someone who was kind to me. When I did something wrong, he would never judge me, let alone punish, never do that. Whenever I did anything stupid, he would just laugh. So when you do stupid things, you just laugh. That was much better than getting upset or angry. Whenever anyone criticized me, I thought it was so funny these days. Isn't it better to be laugh than actually get upset at something? If ever I do anything wrong, it's Ajahn Chah's fault. He trained me. Do your parents tell you off sometimes? How can they? You're only just following what they told you to do. It's their genes you're expressing. You can't tell me off, Mum. It's your genes, nothing wrong with me. Your fault. But then, anyway, this is what you learned about criticism and feeling bad about things. When you laugh, it's much, 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 much better. I don't know if I told you the last time of some of these stories which I learnt as a young monk, from people like Ajahn Chah. The story of the African American soldier who was criticized. This was racial abuse. Did I tell that story here? Okay. This was, when I first went to Thailand, it was just at the end of the Vietnam War. So about a year before, there was a big US Army base close to Ubon, where Ajahn Chah lived. And one day, there was an African American soldier who was in a rickshaw being driven into town for some business or whatever. And the rickshaw driver passed a bar where many of his friends were drinking and getting quite drunk. And one of his friends shouted out, "Where are you taking that dirty dog to?" pointing to the African American soldier. It was the start of racial abuse. And that driver was afraid, because if that soldier could understand what he was called, there would be a fight. But the African American soldier was just looking around, just enjoying the view. So the driver decided to have some fun as well, and said to his friends getting drunk, "Look how dirty this dog is. He's black. I'm going to take him into the river, throwing him in for a good wash." Ha ha ha. Everybody started laughing except for the soldier. The soldier was just looking at the scenery. When they got into town, the soldier got out of the rickshaw without paying. And when the driver shouted out at him in the best English he could, "Sir, money, money, sir." And that's the point where the big African American soldier turned around and said in perfect, the Isan language, the local language, perfect language, "Dogs don't have money." And I thought that's a wonderful way of dealing with abuse. So if anyone calls you a dog on a bus or something, you don't have to pay. So sometimes that sort of laughter and that kindness is a totally different way of looking at life and treating some of the difficulties in life. And it means you get wiser and kinder, and you grow in the qualities which is the meaning of your life. It's not growing in wealth and possessions, but growing in kindness, growing in wisdom. Sometimes, all the years I've been a monk, how much have I earned? How much have I got in my bank account? I don't have a bank account. I don't have a credit card. I have no superannuation. I have no insurance, of nothing. Is that true? In one sense it is. In another sense, I've got each one of you. If ever I need anything, you will get it for me. You know, some time ago somebody wanted to get me a new pair of glasses. These ones. I didn't know what they were getting me. Only after they gave them to me and I took them off, I noticed. It says on here, Gucci. It's not my fault. That's what it says in here. Check it. I don't know. See? Yeah, baby. No, nothing in there. Although one day, even just before I came in here, a few of you wanted me to sign the latest book. That's was it Holy Jolly Jolly or something? Holy Jolly Joey or something. Anyway, you know, sometimes the pen doesn't work. So one day somebody gave me a pen to sign more books. It's one of the best pens, you know, biro pen I've ever had. It worked every time. And then when I took it out to sign some books, somebody said, Ajahn Brahm, that is a Mont Blanc pen. Yeah, what's that? I don't know. I don't go into shops, I don't see adverts on TV, but apparently that's a very prestigious pen. So I had to give it up. And get out the biro, which never worked. But that's what it's like being a monk. You don't have any money, but it's amazing just how people feed you and are kind to you and look after you. You don't have money, but you have compassion, you have kindness. And that creates a big family of, you know, the Buddhists who support you. And I know I never need to want for anything in my life. Even when I went over to Hong Kong recently, I told everyone, made it public, look, I've come here with no health insurance. When I travel overseas, I don't have any insurance. No money, just my kindness and the wonderful friends which I built up over the years. And I know that that's what I can trust in. And it is true, if ever I did, as I say, break a leg or something, tripped over and broke a leg. If it was in Hong Kong, there's quite a few doctors over there would have a fight. Who looks after me? It's kind of cute, I think. There's the kindness, it's like family. If that was like one of your relations, you know, and they broke a leg and you could do something about it, of course you'd help out. And that's kind of the beautiful part of life. When I go to Colombo, to Sri Lanka, am I going to get any insurance? Of course not. Because there's so many people there. They'll be hoping I broke a leg so they can make some good karma and just heal it up for me. It's like one of these monks who was visiting his family over in Chicago years ago. I know Chicago can be really cold, very windy, and when it does get icy, it's very, very slippy in Chicago. He slipped over and he did break his leg. And he told me afterwards, he was taken to hospital with a broken leg, and of course, you know, they contacted his mother who lived in Chicago, and when she came into the room to see her son with a broken leg, he told me he never seen his mother smile so much. She was so happy. How can you be happy when your son's in pain and broken his leg? And she said, now son, I've got you exactly where I want you. You can't go back to Thailand and become a monk or Sri Lanka and just disappear in some cave somewhere. You're in the hospital, you can't go anywhere. Now I'm going to mother you whether you like it or not. And those people who have got people they love so much, imagine that you could actually just care for them to the bits and they can't refuse anymore. So that's one of the lovely things about another way of looking about life and safety. If you've got lots of friends, that's your best insurance. Good karma, kindness, you have nothing ever to worry about. Don't have to look at your bank balance. It's not important. Look at your karma balance. The kindness, number of friends, the number of times you've looked after and served others. They'll always look after and serve you. It's a beautiful life. And each one of you here, the same. Okay, one last story. It's not just being a monk you can do this, but sometimes part of being a monk is helping others. I told this story today at lunchtime. You probably heard it here before, and that was when there was one Sri Lankan woman many years ago that she was studying nursing at Curtin University. And then she told me that the tragedy to pay the bills, she had 2 kids I think at the time, but her husband was working 2 jobs. This was many years ago. And because he was working 2 jobs, he was driving home early in the morning and he basically fell asleep and he killed himself. And so it was a great tragedy. This woman had lost her husband and just the main financial supporter, and she was still at university doing a nursing degree. And she had did she have a couple of kids at that time? I think she did. But anyway, Sri Lankan community collected some money to look after her, but that was only for her basically temporary needs. What should she do next? Because it was Curtin University, because I was go there to give talks and look after them, they'd given me this John Curtin Medal for community service many years ago. And that's where I got to know the then Vice-Chancellor at Curtin. What was her name again? Hackett, I think. Was it Teresa Hackett? Well, but anyway, she was the Vice-Chancellor, and she was very, very friendly. So much so that I had her phone number. And so I called her up to her office in Curtin and got straight through. Ajahn Brahm is calling you. And so she answered the phone. And it's very rare to be able to get straight through to a Vice-Chancellor. And anyway, so what's the problem? I said, this Sri Lankan lady, she's one of your students. At Curtin University, she's lost her husband, died in a car crash. Can you help her? I said, Ajahn Brahm, thank you for letting me know. A lot of people ask, and just for wrong reasons, but I trust you. So the Vice-Chancellor made sure in a very short time she was awarded a full scholarship for her studies, didn't have to pay anything. And eventually, that lady, she graduated, and she became, I forget the position in nursing, but she's one of the top nurses here. So basically, just what you know, who you know, sometimes, and we share all this good karma, and they look after you, and they care for you. I think it's a wonderful way of living. So that means, she keeps coming here every now and again, but this was 20, 30 years ago. So she's not middle-aged, she's getting on a bit now, being honest. But she's a wonderful woman, paid back the debts she had to society, not with money, but by caring for everybody, and really working hard as a doctor, as a nurse, sorry. That's what I like in this world. You don't pay people back for their kindness just with money, but through helping even more, and being just a wonderful person. I did say this was the last story, but there's always another one. And again, these stories I keep saying inspire me. I don't know if you know that one of those boat people years ago, he's that's right. He was from. Was it Bangladesh? No, from Vietnam. Also Vietnamese. And when he arrived, in Australia, actually just in sight of shore, he received this wonderful welcome to Australia by these two West Australian fishermen. These two West Australian fishermen shouted at him, "Welcome to Australia, mate! Have a beer!" And he always remembered that. And eventually, got settled in South Australia and became the governor of South Australia for 2 terms, eventually. Not straight away. But he paid back, the kindness he received by somebody actually settling him here with his service as the governor of that state for 2 consecutive terms, highly regarded. I kind of like stories like that. People come with nothing. They work hard and they make the best of it, and they're recognized not by giving them medals or awards, by just giving them the opportunity to serve. Anyway, I did say that was the last story, so I better stop now, otherwise I get into more trouble. So thank you all for listening. I don't know what they're going to give the title of this talk to, because there's many things. Sorry? The Great Fool of Life. Oh, Pool of Life. I'm glad I didn't hear that accurately. Okay.